Hello and welcome to Stream Theory. We're still calling this Stream Theory, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. This is Stream Theory. I'm Jackson. I run the YouTube channel Skip Intro. And on the other line, I guess the first line, because this ends up going up on your YouTube channel,
Yeah.
is Thomas Flight of Thomas Flight. Hello, Thomas. How are you?
Hi. I think we can keep calling it Stream Theory, even though it's basically a Succession podcast at this point.
HBO shilling.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
We decided to rename it this year.
We had a discussion in one of our back channels. We've decided to switch from shilling Netflix to shilling HBO. So we are HBO shills now.
Yep. I made my list of top 10 shows of the year, and 5 of the top 6 were all on HBO. So,
I mean, you can't argue with quality. So
no, and they had Dune this year too, which has
Great
been
movie.
great for you. So, yeah. So we're here to talk about the 3rd season of Succession because it ended last Sunday, and Monday rolled around, and we were like, "Man, it feels weird that we're not talking about Succession every Monday. Let's do it. Let's do it anyways." So we're going to talk about it today, and we're going to talk about the whole 3rd season. So I assume there will be some spoilers. Let's call this your spoiler warning. Happy holidays to everyone who's listening, by the way. Whatever holidays you celebrate. I wonder if we'll ever get like a Christmas episode of Succession. That would be kind of weird.
like a Christmas special. It's just like
Well, they had the Thanksgiving episode the first year, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
And then they kind of just yada yada past Christmas and all other holidays, really. But Thanksgiving definitely happened in the universe. But yeah, we're gonna talk about Succession's. I don't know about you, but I thought it was excellent 3rd season.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I have it as I thought it was the best show of the year, and
best TV. Yeah, best TV I watched all year. Easily, like there was no other show that I watched where like I was anticipating Sunday rolling around because Succession was going to be on, and I didn't feel that way about anything else this year. So
it's weird because I've been looking at a lot of critic top 10 lists because I don't know, I'm like a masochist, I guess, but they all are putting like Succession lower. Like it's all in the back half of the top 10, and I think Matt Zoller's sites is the highest I saw it. He had it like 4, and I was like, I'm surprised. I just am not. I'm surprised that people seem to be like lower on it. I haven't been like as plugged into the conversation about season 3 as I was with seasons 1 and 2, because I recapped all of the episodes, and it was just too much to do that and also keep up with what everyone else was saying. So I was losing my mind. Yeah, I don't know. Where do you want to start?
We both love it a lot, and I think there's a lot to talk about. So apologies up front, people listening to this / watching this, if this conversation gets a little scattered. But yeah, there's a lot of different things to cover. Where to start? I think since we last talked, we talked about the premiere of season 3.
Okay. Yes. We did do
and I think you put out your video since then. Is that correct?
yes, I put out a video after the first 2 or 3 episodes. Yeah.
Let's maybe hit like broad strokes. Succession season 3.
Sure.
Did this like change the way you think about the show and the story and what it means, or did this just kind of confirm everything you were already feeling about what Succession is?
I think that it kind of solidified what I was thinking. So I rewatched the show coming into season 3. I rewatched seasons 1 and 2. I think that the show hits really differently once you know the direction everything's going in.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that they're really good at is kind of hiding all of the characters' motivations. But once you figure out what they end up doing, you can kind of reverse engineer, and you're like, oh, they were planning that way back here.
Right.
But we didn't know that because we didn't know what they were going to end up doing.
Yeah.
So
we'll talk about that more later in the finale. There's a super like obvious lead in to what ends up being like the twist kind of. And like in hindsight, you're like, oh, we should have all seen this coming, but it managed to surprise, I think, most people anyway.
That surprised me because I'm usually awful at seeing things coming, and I was like, I saw that one coming a mile away, and I was like, very proud of myself that nobody else. Anyways, I think that it kind of solidified it in terms of. I think that this, if I remember watching the first season, it didn't really click for me that it was like a great show until like the seventh episode. And then I thought all of season two was great. And going back, I think you realize that the beginning of season one is maybe better than you thought, but it takes you a little while to get into it. And season three, I felt like was right where season two left off. I didn't feel like there was any. I didn't feel like there were really any bad episodes this season. Just like I didn't really in season two. There were ones that were obviously better than others, but it was kind of, I don't want to say formulaic, because it does keep you on your toes, but it was very much in line with the two seasons that we had already seen.
Yeah.
In that it kind of centers around one of the kids who is picked as this heir apparent. First season it was Kendall. Second season it was Shiv. This season it kind of materializes into being Roman. And they kind of have this rise, and then they epically humiliate themselves and in public, and that kind of hurts. And then there's an attempted coup that falls apart. And I'm interested to see where things go from now.
What that'll look like for Connor.
Yeah, are we going to see a Connor season, or are we going to start transitioning into, if you think of this as like a Shakespearean 5-act play? I think
Right.
Brian Cox has been on the record saying that he doesn't think it'll go past 5 seasons. So if you think of it that way, was this kind of the climax of the whole story, and now we're going to pivot into more of an end game situation?
Right.
One of the things I've been thinking about a lot this season is when I was reading, they were thinking about killing off Logan Roy at the end of season 1, and quickly realized that was stupid and they shouldn't do that. But at some point, like, you do have to like try and succeed him, because that's like the title. And are you going to do 2 seasons where he's? I was wondering if that might be the end of this season, and you're doing like 2 seasons of Succession, or of Succession of succeeding, whatever. Or if you're going to do just one at the end. Does that feel funky if you just have the one season that's no Logan? I don't know. What did you think?
I love the season as well. I think some of my favorite episodes of the whole show were in this season. I think my memory is a bit spotty. I rewatched season 1, but not 2 before going into this season.
Yeah.
Or I watched pieces of season 2, but not all of it. There was like this season felt a little bit more spotty to me. Like there was a few episodes where I was like, that was kind of weird. Some of that might have had to do with like how they were limited by COVID in production, which I
think it definitely felt that way for the first 7 episodes.
Yeah.
Until they get out to Italy.
I was reading some stuff about that, and it sounded like that played a big role, even in how they were able to stage things. Like one of the things the show does that's kind of unique is like they will often have a big room just like full of characters, and they'll just kind of shoot it, and the cameras are like moving between characters, and there's a bunch of wide shots of like everybody just standing around or walking around. And there was places where some of that was maybe a little bit more absent because they had to just kind of like, here's your close-up of this character, here's your close-up of this character. And they did it in a way that still like felt natural and fit within the structure of the show. It wasn't ever like obviously awkward. But I think, some of those limitations were felt in that the show didn't feel quite so as freewheeling to me as some of the past seasons have. But I think they did a great job in spite of that, and they can't really be blamed for the circumstances they're operating in. So
I think the rooms got like smaller.
Yeah.
That was something that I noticed. The rooms were still there, but like in the episode where they're picking the next president, like you still have that room where they're all talking at each other, but it's only like 7 characters instead of like an Argestes episode back in season 2, where it's like an entire conference and everybody's walking around, and we're like, or the dinner with the Pierces and the Roys, which was like 20 people or whatever. So they were, I agree, and they felt more like bottle episodes.
Yeah.
I think.
In terms of story, though, I definitely liked the direction everything went. I like that we got a little bit more Roman. Like this felt like a genuine arc for him. So his character got a little bit more developed. I feel like he got to graduate from just like the guy who was always with the witty, inappropriate jokes all the time to like having an actual arc. And not that that's like totally non-existent in the other seasons, but he definitely felt like more back burner for me in the past. And here, like his arc is kind of the I mean, he's competing with Kendall as being like the primary emotional arc, but he's definitely kind of front and center, especially towards
It's one of the more
end.
engaging arcs for sure.
Yeah. So I like that we delve a little bit more into his character. And I'm a huge fan of Greg and Tom and their arc, and we got to see more of them and them kind of develop. So I think like
Could have had more Greg this season, I think.
we could have maybe had more Greg. I think interestingly, like I love Greg, but like Tom's arc in a certain way is very has become very important to me in the show. In that like there's an interesting dynamic, the dynamic between him and Shiv and their relationship and how he's trying to kind of like the show is, this is getting into some other stuff, but this will be chaos, whatever. We'll go with it. If the show, and one of the things it does so well for me is how it lays out like these human relationships that are very flawed and the complicated nature between them. Like the obvious one is Logan and all his children and their relationship to their father and his relationship to them. But then you also have like their relationship to each other and like Tom's relationship to Shiv and then Tom's relationship to Greg and the dynamics of each of those, and sort of just like it's weirdly like the show's about so many things, capitalism, climate change, all these things that you've pointed out, like, but I think one of the things that makes it so compelling for me is the way that it portrays these like the dynamics of dysfunctional relationships.
Yeah.
And
I think
no,
sorry.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, one of the things that was most difficult for me when I was recapping each week. So every week I would watch the episode once, no notes, and I'd sit back and I would like think about it for a day, and then I'd watch it again and take notes, and then I'd try and write my recap. And each week I became more and more anxious about the first watch I would do of each episode, because I was like, this show is about so many things, and I don't feel like I'm doing any of the things justice by focusing on any of them. Like,
Right.
Like I just felt so intimidated by all of the different things it was talking about. Because yeah, it is about capitalism. Yeah, it is about climate change in regards to that. But it's also about politics. It's also about language. It's also about families. It's also about like, I don't know, a billion different things. And I feel like the only thing that really captures all of those things together is the show itself. So anytime you like try to remove that and you try to just talk about the show, you end up losing some of the stuff
Right.
that is what makes the show so great and is very difficult. I don't know.
I have a question. Maybe this will like kind
I
of
love questions.
give us a construct through which we can like try to narrow all the different things we want to say. Is there, of all those things, so you just said you don't want to do this, but I'm going to ask
so we're
you
going to
to.
do it anyways. Okay,
So
cool.
like of all those things, of all the different things it's trying to say, the different ways, tools the show is kind of utilizing to talk about the things it's talking about, was there anything in particular, like a certain scene or a certain like arc within the show or episode, or like something that just really impressed you or stood out to you, or you're just like, that in particular was, I thought, really smart or clever or whatever?
I felt like this was the first season of the 3 that I felt like I started to understand Logan as a character, as opposed to just like a plot device.
Yeah.
I felt like the first 2 seasons he's kind of just like, he's just there he's just like God, essentially. Like he doesn't ever mess up, or if he does, he fucks you anyways. And like he's just unbeatable. and you don't really know why he's like bullying his kids, really. Like especially in the first season, it's just like, why are you such an asshole? And the second season, I think, that final shot where you see him kind of smile at Kendall's testimony or press conference, I think you start to get it. And this whole season, I felt like in seeing him try to groom Roman for the top job,
Yeah.
I felt like I got a better sense of him and his idea of kind of. I wrote in one of my recaps that I kind of feel like he's Emperor Palpatine from the last Star Wars movie, The Rise of Skywalker, when he's like, I want you to strike me down, because if you strike me down, that means that you're evil and filled with hate, and that means that I basically win because you're me
Right.
now, and
Yeah,
you take
yeah.
my place. And I feel like that's what he is. He wants to like bully his children into a survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
It's like this very Darwinian capitalist idea of parenting or family relationships. And he's like, I will craft you into me, and that way I will be immortal because you will be me.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he keeps running into is the fact that he has bullied his children, and has his very process makes it impossible for them to become him.
Right.
Like the way that he is constantly bullying and humiliating Roman has given Roman this like weird humiliation kink that he just like cannot relate to on any level. And like he even tries, which is one of the most like interesting things of this of the season. Is he's like, is this like is this like a domination thing? Like you're trying to be like, fuck you, here's my dick, or like he's always saying the phrase that he always uses is like, make them bend for it, bend for me, or whatever, which is obviously like this sexual dominance imagery that he's conjuring. And he's like trying to relate Roman sending a dick pic to Jerry that way.
Right.
And Roman isn't like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just like totally foreign. And it's so foreign to him that he's just like, yeah, fuck it. You're not going to be it either. I will go outside the family. I'll outsource it. I'll find someone else who's just as ruthless as me, who hasn't had the same upbringing. I feel like eventually we'll understand what Logan's upbringing is, because we know that he was probably bullied like crazy too.
Right. Yeah.
All those scars on his back, and any allusion we get to like his father or uncle is not great. But yeah, I think that's what really stood out to me about this season. What about you? What was the thing that really captured you out of all of those concepts that what did you finally come around? You think that it's about climate change? Is that did I convince you?
I mean, I think I love especially your you talking about the kind of theme of failing bodies, and I think climate change is definitely a theme that runs through it. But
He's
also,
a climate denier.
Also very present is just the like, yeah, Logan's impending death and everybody's health, and that being like the one threat that's really left to them, like, their own mortality. It's like they have everything, so like what is left that could actually harm them, as the 1% or wealthiest people. So I think those elements are very interesting.
I think there's one other thing that did maybe rear its head in this season, and it has kind of been in the background going back to the second season. Probably starting in the second season, which is like they do like start to gesture a little bit more, I feel like, at some kind of reckoning that isn't just them dying. Like, I think that they are a little more worried this season about political ramifications for their actions.
Yeah.
In the final episode, Lucas Matson tells that story about the slaves and how they didn't want the slaves to be able to recognize each other and join up against them.
Yeah.
Back in the second season, there was that episode where Antifa protesters were outside ATN, and they thought that they like got in the building, but it was just a suicide. Don't worry.
Yeah.
But I think that there is something to that is like I don't think you can underestimate the show's when it like burbles stuff up like that in the background, because it tends to, as I'm sure we'll talk about with the finale, it tends to actually have weight to it. Like
Yeah,
they don't
yeah.
really waste any time with those things. But I still think that the big thing is, failing bodies for sure, and failing
Yeah,
health and addiction and all that
Yeah.
stuff.
No, those are great points. That stuff is present there. And that's one of the amazing things about the show, is that it's so committed to a perspective, which is great. Like it doesn't do these maneuvers of like, ooh, we're gonna fly outside of the perspective of these characters to remind you that, by the way, other stuff is going on in the world. It's like,
Yeah.
we remain on the ground with these characters, and there's stuff happening kind of just in the periphery, and they're maybe trying to like brush it away or ignore it or like not look at it, but it's present. It's still present to them, and it kind of reminds you of like what is happening outside of the world that these characters kind of contain themselves in, the wall that they put up, the real world. I think the first episode does that little flyback where it's like, hey, they're all watching the news or whatever. But like that's the only time the show ever, I think, does that kind of maneuver where it's like, we're going to leave the perspective of the characters that you're with.
I think that has to do with the fact that those first two were directed by Adam McKay.
Yeah, yeah.
And I feel like the show obviously owes a ton to Adam McKay's like direction and style, and like it feels very much in the vein of like The Big Short.
Yeah.
And not just because Jeremy Strong's in both.
Right.
But also I think that the guy who directs like most of the episodes is Mark Mylod.
Yes.
And I feel like it does feel slightly different than those first two episodes. Like they're not doing the pop zooms quite as much.
Yeah. It's evolved.
And it just feels like a little more nuanced, I guess. I feel like that's the thing that really stands out to me, is it has such a distinct perspective, and it really offers like a lot of nuance to these concepts that are like, I don't know, like it would be one thing, or super easy for them to be like, oh, capitalism's bad.
Right.
And like I feel like we kind of saw that with like a Squid Game this year.
Yes.
But it is like that doesn't really explain like our place in it, which is one of the things that I think Succession is really good at doing, is it is confronting you on your place within the system, because you do identify with all these characters, but it's also not like, it's empathetic to you. It's like, you didn't choose to be born to Logan Roy. You didn't choose to be born in America or have this whole like capitalism structure or whatever. But I mean, you are profiting from it, but you didn't choose it. So like, you're in a difficult place, and I get that, but also like, that doesn't mean you're beyond commentary. And I think that's I think that's like so difficult to navigate, even like in conversations of like political spaces, like people who talk about like these kinds of philosophies for a living, like I feel like they struggle to deal with that kind of nuance. And the show is just like fully immersing you in it.
Yeah.
Like, you love Tom. We love Tom. Tom is great. Tom is also literally cited in the final episode as a man who is making money off of, quote unquote, turning on the bigot spigot.
Right.
And like destroying America through ATN.
Yes.
Like, he's a terrible person, but he's also like, I don't know, he's also at the mercy of other terrible people.
Yeah.
And his wife doesn't love him. So I don't know.
I think the show does an excellent job at doing this maneuver of like, about the struggle at the top of this huge media company that's incredibly wealthy and very influential, but that struggle is really just about like some kids and their dad, like some kids like trying to gain the approval of their father, which is this very like universal like theme. It's this very human thing.
It's what all the memes have become about.
Right. Yeah.
Who'll earn a kiss from daddy?
And it does that in a lot of ways where it takes these I think that's the primary tool it uses to like find that empathy, even though they're terrible people, even though they're way out of touch with like the lifestyle most of us live in this country. It's like we can empathize with them because they're still dealing with these, human issues and it kind of paints this portrait of how a lot of the ills, quote unquote, of society are kind of these like weird extensions of like you just take human problems, basic human things that we struggle with, and you like blow them up to this society scale. This is not a unified field theory of what's wrong with society. I don't necessarily think this applies to everything.
I'm holding you to this.
I think to some extent it's true where it's like you take little human problems and you blow it up to a society scale, and then you have climate. It's like you have one person trying to get their dad's approval is just one person trying to get their dad's approval. 5 billion people trying to get their dad's approval is climate change or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think you're definitely onto something where it's like the hierarchy of Logan and his 3 children is really just like the smallest unit of the entire Waystar company,
right.
Where it just keeps branching out from there.
Yeah.
And as many, I think one of the things I think the show maybe, if I have a critique, or it's not even really a critique, but one of the things I think the show doesn't show or struggles with is showing how that continues to branch out. And I think that they try to do it with Greg. And you get it in that last episode when he's like, can I have maybe my own Gregs?
Right.
And he's like, you can have 20. And I think one of the things that gets lost because we're focused so much on this family and these individuals, which I think has enormous benefits. Like, I think that there's a ton to be said for how well that these characters are constructed and all the different ways we're able to empathize with them. And there's a lot to be said for that. But I think they kind of lose that, the even further structures. Like, when they make a decision, we don't see like all these people get laid off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We don't see that, and I don't even know how you would do that, if that's even possible.
Right.
Because that's just so many moving parts. Like,
Yeah.
you'd have to make the show about, because then like each one of those people who got laid off has their own little tree of family, which also includes like maybe they're the Logan of their family. They're just way less successful, but they worked at Waystar, and their kids also hate them, but they're also looking for, you know what I mean? And it kind of reminds me, you'd have to make it like you made The Wire.
Right.
But I feel like there's pros and cons to both.
I would argue, I think in this case, you don't have to do that because that storyline is just like our lives. Like, we are like the people around us are the ones watching ATN and getting laid off and like doing all those things. That story is just like the society we see around us. And so I think the show does an interesting thing by focusing in on this little, like, here's the peek behind the curtain to see like the you're the trickle down or whatever. You're the branch. You're like level 20 on the branch watching this show, and like, let's go all the way back up to the top and get a glimpse of what that looks like. And I think there's a benefit. I mean, everything's a trade-off because you have a limited amount of time. And some of the benefit of like staying contained to these characters is that it gets to portray those characters and the dynamic between them in like a higher resolution than I think the show could if it was having to like show all those ramifications and stuff like that. And like you said, I think it does do a good job of like keeping those things present in our mind by how it integrates them into sort of the fringes and the periphery of the story. So many things are coming to my mind. So I have one being related to these. We mentioned sort of Adam McKay and Mark Mylod. I think Jesse Armstrong is also really responsible for some of those elements in the show.
Absolutely,
and his in like coming from like In the Loop and Veep and like that. I've started to see the influence of him more so on the show as it goes on, in just how you like kind of hang out with this group of characters and see them like evolve over time. And
I think he's I mean, he's the showrunner for Succession, but he's weirdly like doesn't get enough credit for
Yes,
it.
yeah. A lot of people I keep hearing, not necessarily from you, but I keep hearing people like refer to it as like Adam McKay's show, and it's like it's really not.
It's a common misconception with TV. The same thing happened with Lost, and everyone called it J.J. Abrams' show because he directed the pilot, and then famously skedaddled on the entire project and left a man who had never run a show before to just in Damon Lindelof, and he was like, I was just by myself. Anyways,
So shout outs to Jesse Armstrong. That was my only point there. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was related to what we were talking about with empathy and the dynamic between them, and like Tom being so likable and so terrible, is like one of the things that really stuck out to me this season. I've thought about it in the past with other seasons, but it is really in the forefront here. Is like the show does such a great job of getting you to align with people because of how it manages conflict, but then it really does not give you satisfaction in terms of how it like how it'll like give you a little bit for a character that maybe you've been rooting for or something, but it does so in a way that like removes any joy that you might have had in that
Okay.
And we can get into
yeah, give me an example of that. Give me a specific.
So the clearest example of that in this season is Tom's arc. So I think like one of the reasons I think a lot of people feel like they're on Tom's side is because like if there's a bad guy, it's Logan Roy. It's like they're all bad, but like Logan Roy is the supreme bad guy in the show. He's the baddest of them all. And so we kind of inherently like want to align ourselves or want to root for the people who are like going after him to some extent. And so that's why
we picked Kendall in the first season.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why Kendall kind of feels like the protagonist, because like he's the most sort of like from the beginning anti-Logan kind of character.
He's been playing it since he was 4.
Yes. And so I think we feel sympathy with Tom because he's getting beat down by Shiv, not physically, but emotionally for like most of the show. I don't know if we talked about it in the last one, but to me, she seems like the clearest reflection of like a continuation of the emotional abuse in a certain way, the emotional abuse she received from Logan, and also we find out more in this season from her mom. She kind of turns around and projects onto Tom. They all do that in a twisted way with the people around them, but like with Shiv, it's the clearest in a certain way, and Tom's on the receiving end of that, and we see that the entire episode, and we're like kind of rooting, like you just want him to like stand up for himself the entire season. It's like, dude, just do something. Like you can't just keep like he even comes to this realization in season 2 where it's like, this is not a good situation. And you're like, let's go. Like,
and the beginning of season 3 is very much, he's like more in control, and I don't know, it feels like he is kind of standing up for himself, and then you kind of see him backslide, and you're like, oh no.
Yeah. And so the entire time I'm just rooting for Tom. I'm like, do something, stand up for yourself, improve your situation or whatever. And he does that in the finale of season 3. And it's to screw over everybody else. So there's multiple things going on. It's like you want Logan to be taken down. You want Tom to stand up for himself. And one of those undercuts the other. So it's like you finally get to see Tom sort of like make the move, betray Shiv, do these things. And it's like, it's in a way that takes away the satisfaction of that. Also, another example of this, Logan.
That's a great point.
There's this tension in the show that exists where you kind of want to root for like the siblings to take down Logan because he's the baddie, but you also see how totally screwed they are by this desire for Succession. Like Kendall's the perfect example. Like this is obvious. The struggle to like take control of the company is obviously like a super toxic element of his life, and so you're kind of rooting for him to succeed because you want somebody to take out Logan. You want somebody to like put Logan in his place. You know, show Logan that he's wrong or just displace him in some way. But like for Kendall, it seems like the process of trying to do that is like destroying him. And there's a certain sense in which I think you're like, they flirt with it towards the end here where it's like, dude, just get out, like take the money and go. That would probably be the best thing for him. Like he'd be healthier if he just left.
I do want to push back on that.
Okay. I'll let
when you're
you
done with your thought, when you're done with your point. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me, so I think there's a sense in which like when you get to the point where it's like, okay, Logan is looking at selling the company and just like, you know, cutting off all his kids from Succession or at least the 3 and just going away. I feel very conflicted about that because it's like on one hand, that's a move against them and he like wins by doing that. And so it's like, like the bad guy is winning. And so I feel bad about that. I don't want that to be because I want them to take him down.
Right.
But on the other hand, there's a feeling of like, that's almost the best thing he's ever done. If like that would almost be the first good thing it's almost the first good thing he's tried to do in the show, which would just be like put an end to the whole thing and just like let your children like go of the, I don't know. So
the show is filled with those kinds of like poetic undercuttings of itself.
Right. Yes.
For sure.
So you finally get like the 3, I'll wrap it up and then I'll let you respond.
Take your time.
So you finally get to the 3 kids are like, they're going in. Finally, you're like, yes, they're united. They're going in to take him down. Like Roman's finally ready to stand up against his dad. All these things. Like you're like, cool, this is great. But they're doing it almost in a sense like to rescue this thing that's like destroying them. It's like they're going in, like he's finally, the whole time they're fighting for succession, and I don't know, that point is maybe more complicated than I can fully flesh out. But I think it's like there's a very clear tension to me there between like, you're rooting for these characters to accomplish something. Well, here, have that, but we're gonna give that to you in such a way that like makes you be like, ooh, I don't know if it's actually good if they accomplish that.
Or like the fact that, you know, one of the things that keeps holding them back throughout the entire show is that they are competing with each other.
Right.
And they finally are working together. And you're like, oh, together you guys can definitely do this. And it's an idea that is floated constantly on the show, right? Like I don't know, even just this season, like the second episode of this season, Kendall's like, if we all work together, we'll kill him and we will take over. And we also should do that for the company because X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And they don't want to do it because they're afraid of Logan. And when you see them all finally be like, you know what? No, we do need to stick together because it is our only way forward. And we aren't afraid of him anymore. Or rather, we are afraid of him, but together we're going to overcome that. So that's like very galvanizing. But you also feel like, I don't know, there's a part of me that watches the show that is like totally on Logan's side where he's like, no, these people are bad at business.
Right.
Like they just aren't, they're going to sink themselves if left to their own devices. And I mean, I feel that way about Logan too, except he just seems to randomly have the track record of like, it just seems to work for him. Like he's borderline magical bully. I did want to push back on this idea because I do hear this a lot from critics or from like you or other friends or something where they say that like Kendall being in the business is like very bad. And at a certain level, for him individually,
right,
like his
mental
personal
health.
well-being.
Yeah.
And at a certain level, I get that. Right. Because I do think that the show, well, I don't want to speculate on what I think the show is doing because it's, but there are definitely indicators of that, right?
Yeah.
But I also feel like his lowest points have been when he is most at odds with his father, and been on the outside looking in. The time that he's clean when we meet him in the show, and he's on the inside of the company.
Yeah.
And he doesn't delve back into drugs until he gets fired by his dad.
Yeah.
And tries to execute the bear hug, which is very confrontational. Season 2, he is very depressed, and there's a lot to be said for him not dealing with the manslaughter thing very well.
Right.
But he does seem like the most stable of like he seems more stable in season 2 than he does in season 3.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's partially because Logan actually trusts him, and he has like
Yeah.
a defined role. I feel like that is the thing that Kendall really needs, is a defined role. I think back to the episode where is like the 4th episode of Safe Room of season 2, which is overshadowed with like these, like every once in a while they'll cut back to Kendall like going up to the roof and like thinking about jumping off, but he also is like in charge of Logan's like meds, and he's talking to Shiv at the end when he thinks that Shiv is going to be the successor, and he's like, I just hope that you find a place for me, because I don't know what I would be without this job.
Yeah.
And then I think we kind of see what he would be without this job in season 3, which hits like it's nadir at his birthday party when he just literally doesn't know what to do with himself.
Yeah.
And he's totally depressed until Shiv is like, we need you to help take down Dad. And we have a defined role for you as chair and part of this thing. And that gets him like, he literally like snaps out of his
back
depression.
into it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I know that there's like issues with that too, but I feel like there is kind of a false narrative here that the business itself is a drug. Because I think that it is, but I also think that these characters they don't have anything else for meaning in their life. Nothing else means anything to them.
Yeah, yeah.
Their families don't mean anything. Kendall can't even remember where his kids are, like ever. It's like this running gag in this season where he's just like, "Where are my kids? Where are my kids?" Roman can't do literally anything other than business. He can't have any kind of emotional or sexual or romantic relationship with any other human being. Shiv she has a husband, but she treats him like an accessory.
Right.
And I feel like they just don't have anything if they don't have this job.
Which is all, you just gave me a great pitch why none of them should be anywhere close to running all of them. And this is like treating it as like, if these are real life people, like not television show characters, which I think reveals the conceit of the show to a certain degree, which is that like, if Kendall, what you just described is like, yeah, within the world of the show, Kendall is doing better when he's in the company, and these characters have their purpose grounded in trying to take over and run this company. And if there's a sense in which like probably if Logan just keeled over and the three of them got to run Waystar together, and like they would probably,
which would last all of like a week, right? And then they would be at each other's throats.
They'd be at each other's throats, but they'd probably be slightly better off then than they are like now in the show. But like then you'd still have those three people running a huge media, powerhouse, whatever. It's like there's like this false conflict of like, I feel like in our minds as viewers, we can construct this, like we enter into this world where it's like media conglomerate deathmatch, like, and you choose your character and you root for them. But it's like, there's I think the feeling we have sometimes as a viewer that like the solution is if they can just take out the bad guy and take the company, they like that's a false resolution that doesn't actually solve any of the problems that these characters are dealing with within the show. So there's the conflict, there's like that superficial conflict that fuels a lot of the show and is part of what makes it fun to watch. But that is ultimately like the conflict of them psychologically as characters that are like dealing with interpersonal struggle is not going to be resolved by who succeeds.
Yeah, well, and I think one of the things that the show does really well, and shameless plug for my video here, but I think that the question of the show is really trying to get you to ask is not who should succeed, but like should anyone really?
Right.
Like who's going to win this is not really important, but like what should anyone? And I think that there's like a very interesting parallel to be drawn here between this and like the way the media covers politics, in that all of it seems to be about horse race politics, in that it's like, who's going to win the next election? Who's going to win? What are the polls? What do people think of the polls? And it's like all of these just like opinions, and never at any point does anyone ever stop to be like, I don't know, like what would actually materially change.
Yeah.
There's like this Angela Davis quote where she's like, am I supposed to be happy that a woman is in charge of the machinery of war because she's a woman?
Right. Yeah.
I'm not happy about I don't want that. And I think that like I think the show is in a kind of structural way, I think, commenting on that in some, I'm not even sure how conscious it is.
I think it's aware of that.
I guess it would probably be pretty conscious, yeah.
Well, that's part of that. That was part of my point, in that I think it's aware of that because I don't think it actually ever allows you to have that satisfaction, because every time it gives it to you, it structures it in such a way that it's like, oh, here's what you were rooting for, but that's not actually going to be how you want it. And so it's like it's constantly going up again. It's constantly edging right up to like giving you what you want as a viewer, and then like undercutting all the actual satisfaction from underneath that. So whether it's the three siblings like finally going up against, uniting against their father, or Tom finally standing up for himself, or Greg's continuing arc, it's like you are confronted by, I'm rooting for these characters to accomplish certain things, but as they get closer and closer to what I'm rooting, like you're confronted by the fact that what you're rooting for them actually leads to like bad outcomes for them, or like or them doing things that you're like, well, but that's not good. Like I don't actually want Tom. I want Tom to stand up for himself, but I don't actually want Tom to align himself with Logan and turn the even devil. More in turn the bigot spigot on even more.
I think, and that's like a classic TV thing, right? Like
right, yeah.
every great season of television ends with like, and they've won, but at what cost?
Yeah, yeah.
And now you have to wait until the next season to figure it out.
Yeah.
But I think that you're really touching on something that is especially good about Succession, which is that all of those, but at what cost, are, they are thematically connected to the victory.
Right.
Like it's not just, like if I think back to like
it's not just an arbitrary like we'll staple on
the fourth season of Breaking Bad, right? Or the third season. Both of those end with Walt. Spoilers. Walt wins. He doesn't die in either of those seasons, and he does so basically by killing other people.
Yeah.
And I think that at some point you're like especially at the end of season 4 or whatever, and you're like, oh my god, he poisoned a kid, and there's like this huge, I don't know, like, oh wow, he's really slipped personally. Like he has gotten worse. But I don't think that is actually connected to him thematically to survive Gus Fring.
Right.
I think it's all connected in his like psyche of becoming whatever, and we're not here to discuss Breaking Bad, but like I think you're really onto something about Tom, which is like you want him to stand up for himself and become an equal in his marriage with Shiv. Right. But in doing so, he literally throws her down the stairs. Not literally, figuratively throws her down the stairs and marries Greg, his castrated Sporus, right?
Yeah.
And he does become her equal, but in a way that makes them totally incompatible, as like it ends their marriage essentially.
Yeah.
And she can't prove that he did it or whatever. Probably, I don't know. I don't know where they're gonna leave that, because it just ends right there.
And
But
it's reflected too in the tension of something you already talked about, which is like Logan is trying to craft himself out of it, craft his like mini
yeah,
him
I'm glad we came back to this 'cause
through
that's
the
something
fire, and so like if the logic of Logan's world holds, which is that like you have to become a killer to take out Logan, it's like then if one of the kids actually do that, we don't want that because then we just have another Logan on our hands. So it's like it's it
we want this like transformative change, but Logan has set it up so that the rules are that the only person who can succeed is the one that becomes him.
right. And I think the
yeah.
question mark in the show that you talked about earlier, that where it kind of alludes to is like you know, this maybe isn't just like Logan's personal thing. Like maybe it's something about this system that like you know makes it so that these are the people who succeed within the incentives that
Look, man,
are present.
we live in a society.
We live in a society.
I'm glad you brought that back up because one of I think the best scene of the season is the scene with Logan and Kendall having dinner. And in the second to last episode, which I also think is the best episode of the show. I know some people really like the finale, and that's cool. You can like that, but the second to last episode is perfect. And Logan comes there, and Kendall's like, I just want out, which is the thing that Logan has already offered him. And he tries to negotiate, whatever, but he probably would do it, except that Kendall says, I'm not like you. And when you hear him say that, like, it cuts to Brian Cox, and there's like a slow push in, and you can tell that that's the thing that he just can't handle.
Yeah.
Because that is the thing that he wants. He wants to create another version of himself, like a clone. And when he is seeing that taken away from him, that is the one thing he can't abide. It'd be one thing if Kendall just wasn't cut for it, like he just flunked out of Logan school or whatever. But for him to be like, I flunked out and it's because I'm fundamentally different than you. That's the thing that he can't deal with at all.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that sends him over the edge and just starts bullying him harder than he's ever bullied him before. Yeah, I think that's one of the more fascinating things of the show. I was going to say something right after that, but I forgot what it was.
Hopefully it'll come back to you.
Yeah.
Looping way back to something else you mentioned earlier, you briefly brought up kind of Greg's arc in this season. And I think this season really brought home for me how much I think he represents like the path of, so every other character is like somebody who's already like installed in this system of wealth, of capitalism, whatever. And Greg is like, here's a normal guy who starts out just like, you know, taking some hits in the car, puking out of Dodger's eye holes. And then like he is on a trajectory towards the bottom of the top. And with
away from the endless middle and towards the bottom of the bottom of the top.
The bottom of the top with all his army of Gregs.
20 Gregs.
Yeah. But like,
and he might be, you know, the second, what I don't remember how he describes it, but one plane crash away from being the weirdest prince in a
king in Europe.
Yeah.
But I think he really represents like, this is the path in a very humorous, like tongue-in-cheek sort of way. But he's the show's version of a normal guy. This is how a normal, quote unquote, normal regular person becomes the monsters that we see in like the Roy family and Tom and like whatever. It's like it's not just you were born into it and like, you know, you're somehow magically a bad person because you have more money. It's like as you sort of get deeper and deeper into this system, there's a series of like compromises that he keeps making where
who needs a soul? Yeah,
he goes from having, you know, there's a conversation I think about, I forget which season it's in, but like pretty early on at Greg's days at ATN with Tom. And he's like, they have some kind of conversation in the hall where Greg's like, but I disagree kind of or something about
My
that.
principles.
Yeah, my principles. And Tom
Season
like
2, yeah.
laughs at him and is like, what, and then by the time we get to the end of season, it's like he's boasting about suing Greenpeace. He's like climbing the dating ladder. He's like, who needs a soul? Like all these things. And it's funny. It's humorous. Like it's a little exaggerated, but I do think that's the show's like, that's the role Greg is playing in the show to a certain degree, which is like, it's not just, a bunch of, it keeps us from distancing ourselves like too much from these people, in that it's like, regular people given the opportunity, if they tried to rise the ranks, would probably land in like similar situations unless they really like stood by their principles.
Right, because the only way that Greg really survives in this ecosystem is by playing the game.
Yeah,
right?
and compromising.
If he didn't, it's kind of Game of Thronesy in that way, where it's like you either play the game or you die.
Yeah.
And the way it starts for him is that he saves those papers, the documents, when Tom tries to get him to shred them, which is a key piece of leverage that he is then able to use to protect himself and also move up the ladder. And that leads to this other thing, and that leads to this other thing, and all of a sudden he's here. The principles, by the way, that he espouses, the Greg commandments, if you will, are thou shalt not lie if you're the news, and he's against racism. I'm against racism, and Tom says, bullshit, everyone's against racism. I'm against racism. And he says, you shouldn't lie, if you're the news.
If you're the news.
Which I think are reasonable. I think they're reasonable.
But, who needs a soul? Because he really wanted that money, and now Greenpeace has it, so...
Well, it's like Shiv says at the this is when they're playing Monopoly. Which is at the beginning of the last episode.
Oh yeah.
And she, when Tom leaves, she like steals all of his money. And they're like, hey, I think like Willa is like, you stole that money. And she's like, I'm only stealing so I can win.
Right. Yeah.
And that's like the ethos of it's like, I'm not stealing because I just like it. I guess is like, and I guess we tend to like demonize these people who are in power. We're like, oh, Jeff Bezos is trying to fuck over people because he's evil, which, maybe who's to say, but it's because he's trying to win. And the system and the structures in place are all trying to, this is the only way to exist in the system. The same way with Logan. Like the only way to beat Logan is to kill Logan, which also ensures that he survives forever. And that is like the genius of Logan Roy, is that he can't be beaten, because the only way to beat him is by becoming him, in which case he wins, because then he achieves immortality to some extent. Yeah. And I don't know I get the paradox is that you have to choose something from outside the box, which none of these characters are capable of doing, clearly, and B it would be hard for anyone to do, right?
Right.
Like. That's asking a lot of any one person to change an entire society, system, economic structure,
right,
whatever.
But I think, for me, that's a big part of what makes it. Well, it's not what makes it interesting, but I appreciate that about the show, and that's ultimately for me why I don't see it as like a huge conflict of interest. Some people are like, well, should we be, and is this a show that is in a sense like glorifying the actions of like these terrible wealthy people? And
sure.
You could
a common talking point, especially after the first season.
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of died down now, because I think
has.
it's just so popular that people are like, and people like it so much that they're just not talking about it. But I also think that I did a lot of reading of these arguments back when I was writing my video. And one of the counter arguments is, but they're constantly humiliating these characters.
Right.
Like so much of the show is built on a combination of humiliating them publicly and just on a fundamental level that is hard to watch or comprehend. That was one of the arguments that that they made what's her name? Megan Garber made in her essay about the bodily horrors of Succession. She was like, this isn't glorifying the wealthy because we constantly are seeing them like piss their pants, shit the bed, vomit, like whatever else. And then also just the existential dread that is constantly hanging over this show. Like, that is the emotion that I feel the most when I watch an episode, is just dreading what is about to happen next. I remember the shareholder meeting, which it was pretty obvious. It was the middle of the season. Like, it wasn't going to be like the worst possible outcome, whatever it was. But I'm just sitting there the entire time like, oh my God, how is the dread of not knowing what's about to happen.
Yeah.
But knowing that it's not going to be great. I think the show at this point has educated us to knowing that it's not going to be good. And if you look at where Waystar was at the beginning of the series, if we looked at it from like a business perspective, it seems to just be like slowly declining.
Yeah.
And they're like avoiding these massive pitfalls, but not really improving ever. They're just barely hanging on.
They're going from like trying to buy a tech company in season 1 to like being buying, I guess, ultimately buying Valter, to being like bought by a tech company at the end of season 3.
Yeah, they like narrowly avoid this like bear hug thing.
Yeah.
Their stock is like constantly getting a little lower all the time. It's tied to Logan's health. His health is obviously not great. I mean, the show starts with him. The first shot of the show is him peeing in the hallway of his and it's like orange. It's disgusting. That's like the starting point for the show. And then later in the episode he has a stroke, so like it's all just
right.
it doesn't start from like an optimistic place.
No.
And I don't think that it is a very like glorifying of the wealthy show, but I do think that it is very good at showing, like, depicting our place in it,
right,
and having empathy for that, while also being like, but it's fucked up, and just like trying to navigate. I think one thing that also Americans are, that American, whatever, it's easy for us to forget, is that even if you're like at the bottom of the American capitalism ladder, you're still like higher on the global capitalism ladder,
yes,
which also exists.
Yeah.
And I think that it's easy to see even like the lowest bottom feeder of the Roy family as like the poorest of the middle class of America or something
right,
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of rambled there, but there we go.
No, I mean, yeah, I think I pretty much agree. And part of what I was getting at was like, I think I don't have a problem with the show sort of humanizing these people, because to me that's part of what makes it like a good sort of critique or illustration of the situation. Because it's like, the issue isn't really that they're just like wealthy people are like bad people because they have a lot of money. It's like, this system has set it up so that these are the people who are succeeding and within that system. And so it's by humanizing them, you paint a more accurate picture, I think, of the scenario, in that it's just
people.
They're just people. Yeah. And like, in that sense, they're not like magically different from the average person in a way that's like
in any way,
right,
really.
in any way, yes. And so it's like, well, if they're not that different, then what is it that is leading to this environment?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, then maybe the structural, incentives, the system, capitalism, yada yada,
I think that's what stops it from becoming like sanctimonious. Just like,
right, yeah,
capitalism is bad,
right,
and like, okay, cool, I've heard it before. Like, I think that it is really good at showing that they're not especially they didn't like earn their place. They're not like especially better at that, and that they're not especially worse. They're not like
Yeah.
super evil people. They're certainly doing bad things and causing a lot of harm, but they're not just like demonic.
Yeah.
And I think that that is kind of the probably the last shoe to drop for the show, is kind of deconstructing the one evil character that they have, which is Logan. And I think that they've left a lot of breadcrumbs already. And like I said, the thing that really stood out to me was how much more I felt like I understood him as a force this season. And I feel like that's kind of the final like character development piece that
Yeah.
they have to do and will do. And I think that that's going to make a strong argument. I did want to ask you one question about how you felt about that speech that Logan gave in the final episode. There's a speech when Lucas Matson, Alexander Skarsgård's character, is like, "What do you think of the future, man?" And I have it here, but
Yeah.
Logan,
Remind me what exactly.
yeah,
he
Logan
said.
is like, "Oh yeah, I'm really excited for the future," and he's like, "Yep, are you?" He's like, "Well, that's something you say, isn't it? America, I don't know. When I arrived, there were these gentle giants smelling of fucking gold and milk. They could do anything. Now look at them, fat as fuck, scrawny on meth or yoga. They pissed it all away." And I've had people ask me like what I think of that, and I was curious like how you come down on that sentiment that he is feeling towards the future, because that is like the show is like what comes next, what is the next stage.
I think, I don't know. I don't know if I have anything super. I don't know if I have a super intelligent
I can
read on that.
Yeah, sure.
Do you have thoughts?
Yeah,
And then maybe I'll chime in.
I do. I think that what he's really talking about is his like children,
Right.
and this idea that he has, it's a callback I think to the first season. There's this when they're at Austerlitz and they're having the family therapy session, and Kendall shows up drunk, and he lays into Logan and says, "You're so jealous of your own children because of everything you gave us. You can't process it. You can't process this like wealth that you've given us."
Yeah.
And I think that in some ways that this is kind of a distillation of like what the show is thinking about. And this is a perspective that we hear in like, I think like hardcore capitalist, borderline fascist, maybe people say, where they're like, "Oh, we need harder times to create harder men to create good whatever."
It's
And
an
I think
argument
he's
that people have used for like why war is actually good. Maybe.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah. And I think that he's saying some of that, and I think that we're kind of getting to that at the end of the season, where he's like, you need to make your own pile of stuff, because I'm just going to throw this onto the top of mine, and I can't help you anymore because
Yeah.
this bullying thing is not working. So I'm just going to cut you off, cut you dry, which obviously they would still be probably fine. But I think that I'm curious what the message is there about capitalism, because I do think that that's what the show is ultimately about, and like where I think that they're coming down on the wealth of America and
Right.
American business and stuff like
yeah.
that.
I mean, I think I don't know if the show is trying to say anything through that line specifically about sort of like the theme as a whole. Besides, part of my take would just be like seeing that even for Logan, who has pursued this sort of ideal of success, of like building this his castle, there's an emptiness to it, because he's having this sense of like decline of this like image of like how things are supposed to go, and there's this competition, and like the best top guys fight over everything, and they just keep making better and better stuff, and like and it's like, but
But it is the competition that has turned his entire empire into mush, right?
Right.
The internal competition.
And it's ultimately like it's ultimately empty. Like he's in decline. It doesn't really do anything for him. It like his I think you're right in that he's probably getting a lot of that feeling from his kids, where it's just like meth. You could even break it. What is it exactly he says? Meth, yoga.
Meth and yoga.
Those are the only two things he lists, though?
Yeah, he says fat as fuck, scrawny on meth or yoga, which is just a ridiculous sentence to say.
Right, yeah, yeah.
They're both fat as fuck and scrawny on
Meth or
and,
yoga.
And/or yoga.
And/or yoga,
He doesn't say that, but...
I was just like, you could almost draw
and they
parallels.
smelt of gold and milk, apparently. I don't know what that means either. I wasn't sure if he was having a stroke in the moment. When,
He forgot to take his pills and is having another UTI.
He's piss mad again. Yeah. He almost nuked Belgium.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I
maybe
mean,
I'm reading
I think
too much into that one. But
I wouldn't. I don't know if I'd read that as like a pronouncement towards the thesis of the show, but I definitely think it's reveals Logan's character, and sort of his motivation and the weird feeling he has that, like, you know, even though he keeps up this image, like things, there's even though like the system kind of is the one that's built by the guys of his ilk, or you know, and his penchant for like, you all gotta, you know, fight over it, and then may the best man win. Like that is the system that's in operation. And that's why he keeps winning, because that is the system. Even though that's the system in place, he doesn't feel good about it. You know, it's not like, oh yes, I got what I've been getting what I've wanted. I keep winning. So, like, this is great, you know? It's like, no, he doesn't feel good about it either. It's like, and that's a little bit of like I think that's like the golden piggy of money hanging over everything I think, like, everybody who's not at the top keeps thinking, well, the problem is not the system. The problem is that I'm not at the top. The problem is that there's still higher left to climb. And I think in reality, this is why we see like guys like Bezos, like literally going to space, because it's like, it's like you climb up this ladder because you believe, like, if I climb this ladder, that's the point. You win. Like, and then that'll make me feel like I won.
Whatever, right?
You know, great. I'll have transcended into some sort of like, you know, this is the driving force of my life. And then you do that, and then you get to the top, and guess what? It's like, you're still you. You know, the world is still the world. Nothing has changed. And it's like, so what's left to do? I guess get another $5 for my pile, or go to space, or, you know, something. And so I think we see that sort of like the emptiness of it, like reflected in Logan, where it's like he might be winning, but he's not happy.
I think
about
you see that in Tom, right? Like,
yes,
Tom has done amazingly. Like Kendall says this when they meet in the, like, what is it, like a Denny's? I don't know.
Yeah.
And he's like, I respect the hell out of you. Like, you came from basically nothing, and you are now in the inner circle. But we also see that, like, throughout the entire series, Tom is constantly comparing his success to others.
Yeah.
Like, he's never happy for someone else's success. Like, when Greg finally, like, figures out what he's gonna, like, he's like, oh, let's game plan this. Let me help you. And he's like, oh, well, it sounds like you already got it figured out.
Yeah.
I'm useless. Like, he's not, like, happy that he's got it figured out. He's not happy for other people's success. He just starts comparing himself to them. And yeah, I think you're onto something there. What do you not like in terms of predictions, I guess we'll kind of end here, but like, what are you kind of looking for the show to, or expecting it the general direction to go? Like, what are you most interested in seeing happen next? Because for me, I think it is that like development of. I think for the first couple seasons, it was how do these characters relate to Logan and each
Yeah.
other, and now I think that I am kind of pivoting into, okay, what is Logan himself? How does he tick? Because I think that they're all living in Logan's world. And until we really understand who Logan is, I don't think that we can fully understand what the rules of that world are, or what. And I think we have a decent idea, obviously, but I think that we don't really understand the human aspect of it fully
Yeah,
yet.
I'd be super interested if they went the direction of like developing his character a little bit more. I think one of the interesting things is that in terms of perspective, I think the show kind of limits, keeps us from Logan's perspective a lot of the time. Like,
Definitely,
I don't
yeah.
feel like it limits, like, I feel like I understand Roman's position, Shiv's position, Connor's, Kendall's. Like, I know where they're coming from. It's not like hiding their motivations from me, most of the time. But, like, I definitely feel like the show will kind of obscure Logan. And I think that's because the show is using that dramatically, because the show is coming from the direction of the kids usually, and like not knowing, what he's thinking, who's he gonna choose or whatever, is part of the dramatic tension.
He's also just such an amazing liar.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So I think delving deeper into that perspective would be a really interesting direction for the show to take. It's interesting. We talked about kind of the show settling into a formula that kind of worked for this season, but it really does, and they may be able to do that again, but it really does feel like
It'd be super weird if it was
it,
Connor.
it
I don't
would be
know. I
weird.
think it would feel really weird.
Yeah, it feels like there's more of a pivot that would have to happen going into season 4, where it's like the 3 siblings have united, and
And you assume Connor's in there somewhere, right?
and that
Like,
would make a shift.
they did loop him in while they did layer him in on their
Right.
drive over there.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know where they're gonna take it. I think I'm interested to find out. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what the trajectory looks like. In some ways, like, I don't know what the show looks like if the company is actually like sold, and that's that, and like the siblings are kind of like out, and it's just like Logan, and if they're not all together at Waystar, like what does the show look like, or
Yeah,
what's-
do you end up in a like Veep towards the end of Veep when they're out of
Yeah.
the White House and then they're running again?
Right.
And
um
yeah, I don't know. And
I
mean, I do have a lot of faith in them to.
yeah
It sounds like they have a plan, and even if they didn't, I would have a lot of faith in them to kind of figure it out.
yeah
Um,
I think it'll be good, even if they do something like that. Like, but it's just hard for me to. I'm not a writer. I'm not a Jesse Armstrong, as talented as Jesse Armstrong. So I can't imagine what direction
No, I
things are
can't
going to
either.
go.
Can't either.
But yeah, I do think. I mean, ultimately, like, I don't think. I mean, we've talked in the last video we did about Succession, and in this one, and you've done a video about it, like about the show having kind of this thesis that it's moving towards. And I think it is really intelligent in how it constructs a commentary. But I do think it's in some ways like another show that I really love, Better Call Saul.
Also love,
and
yeah.
I think it's very intuitive in how it just kind of like follows the characters on like what feels like a logical progression for them, and is headed for whatever path. Like, it's almost like determinate. Like, you spin up these characters, you get their motivations going,
Yes.
and you lay them all in, and then it's like it's off, and it's a simulation, and the show's just going to go where the characters take us from here. And you kind of
Yeah.
have to follow the logic of those characters, and that can lead to some really unexpected results. Like, I wouldn't have imagined that Logan would choose to sell the company, if you had asked me at the beginning of even this season, but like the way they constructed it, it makes sense by the time we get there, that that's something that he would do. So
I feel like we're gonna get to a point where in this next season, or maybe season 5 or whatever, where they're going to play off our expectation of not believing Logan, and he's going to be telling the truth or not lying.
right, yeah,
Because I remember the entire time when he was like trying to talk to Roman in that scene at the end, I was like, don't trust him. You know you can't trust him. You know you can't. Know you can't. Like, we all know that you can't. And I think sooner or later there's going to be exactly that kind of poetic undercutting of they should have believed him because he actually did tell the truth for once, or something like that.
I think
I don't.
Be satisfying.
I mean, I'm sure it will be very unsatisfying in the most satisfying way.
Exactly. I think the show will continue to give us, just like towards the end of the season 2, they gave us exactly what we wanted. We're finally like, oh yes, Kendall. And then like you get 2 episodes into this season, you're like, no, Kendall, like not
even like a couple scenes, and you're like, oh geez, stop
not
talking
like
to women this way.
Like this is not what we wanted. This is not the Kendall, And so I think it'll keep doing that. I mean, I don't foresee the show giving us anything that's like, wow, this really like makes me feel good.
I think that it's one of the few like great TV shows left. I feel weird saying that because there are so many good TV shows. Better Call Saul's another one where I don't feel like maybe they had this plan the entire time. I don't think they did because they were thinking about killing Logan at the end of season 1. But this idea that you were just talking about, where you kind of fire up these characters, you construct them as fully as possible, and you just kind of see where stuff goes, and you follow stuff that kind of develops, and you're like, oh, you kind of discover them, and you're like, oh, this is a really interesting dynamic between Roman and Jerry, and you like explore that, and then you go do this other thing. And I mean, Vince Gilligan and his team and Peter Gould are like famous for doing this. Like at the beginning of season 5 of Breaking Bad, they show you this like automatic rifle in Walt's trunk.
Right. Yeah.
And they like famously were like, we didn't know what we were going to do with that.
Yeah.
We just wrote ourselves into a corner. I think this is what the best shows do. They write themselves into a corner, and the best shows can write themselves out.
Yeah. And the worst shows
ones don't. And that's why you get such wildly different results with TV, where sometimes it's like, oh, wow, that was awful. That show just shat the bed.
Yeah.
And that show did great. And what is the difference? One was able to write themselves out of the corner and one was not. And that's the end of that. But I think writing yourself into the corner is just as important as writing yourself out. Because if you don't give yourself that kind of depth, that kind of that room to play, because you've just I think it's hard to hide from an audience if you know what the ending is the entire time, because they'll also kind of figure it out, because there's no way to hide it. But if you don't know, then they can't know either.
I do have one prediction, which is that, and I don't think I said it in the last Succession video we did. I almost did, but I'll put it in. I'll put it in. I'll seal it in digital time now
for all 300 people that reached the end of this pod.
I think Greg is Succession's Brant. I'm riding Greg all the way to the top. I think Greg is the one who succeeds at the end.
I love it. That would be one of those, I'm glad Greg won, but I'm so sad that Greg won.
Yeah.
Like, that would be exactly what you're talking about.
There would be a sort of poetic, it would,
There's a plane crash. I don't know.
I think we covered a lot of it. There's so much more.
So much more we could.
We should probably wrap it up. There's so much more we could have talked about. One thing I do want to give a shout out to is I've really enjoyed for Vox, Emily Vanderwerf wrote an article called "The 4 F's of Trauma Response and the 4 Roy Kids of Succession," and I think her take on the show is really good. She talks a lot about how kind of like each of the kids sort of can represent like a response to trauma, like Connor being flight, Kendall being fight, Shiv being fawn, and Roman being freeze. And you see
he is
that
definitely freeze. Yeah.
yeah, that one's indisputable. You like in that van ride over in the finale, he's literally like freezing up and then like overcoming that.
I do want to give a shout out to just Kieran Culkin this season.
Oh, dude.
Because I mean, all the actors are great.
Yeah.
No doubt. Like I'm not trying to say that like he's better than everyone else, or like they're not good or whatever. But I want to give like a special shout out because he took a character who was pretty established, and he's still playing like all of the same lines. Like he's still doing all of the same. He's still the same character, but he gets like this weird kind of confidence as the season goes on, as he becomes like the more favored son.
Yeah.
And it becomes like snarkier, and he's saying all of the same insults. And they used to be kind of like obviously covering for his insecurity. He'd be like, this is what it looks like when you solve all your problems. And then he's like, no, this is what it looks like when you solve all your problems. And it becomes more serious and self-aggrandizing and
like meaner too.
Yeah. And then but it's very subtle, and then they rip it away at the end too, and he's able to play all of those things like in between the lines, and it is phenomenal. One of my favorite line readings in the entire series is when they finally convince him to, in the car ride that you were just talking about, and they're like, "Are you in?" And he's like, "Okay, fuck, okay." And I think that's just like I felt that one. So
yeah, his performance in that final scene.
I don't know how he got that vein to pop out of his head.
Yeah,
but that was great.
Yeah, we see Roman just like totally laid bare there, and then also him up against Jeremy Strong when he's in the dirt, and he's just like making jokes, but like doing it in a way that is totally believable as sort of this like comforting, like, but also enabling, and like it's
another example of you feeling warm towards these characters, like, oh wow, he's actually comforting him, and then you remember and you check yourself and you're like, oh no, he's comforting him about like assisting in like killing someone.
Yeah.
Like we can I guess debate whether it was murder or whatever. I guess that's what Roman would say, whether it was manslaughter or how much he was at fault.
He's like, it sounds like it's not that bad, Kendall. It actually sounds more like a manslaughter than a murder. If you're
actually, you sound like a hero. Honestly.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's like both you care for them more and also realize that they're even worse than you thought they were.
Yeah. It's satisfying and terrible at the same time.
Yeah.
And
incredible.
we didn't even get to the New Yorker profile about Jeremy Strong.
I don't even the thing about the New Yorker profile isn't even the New Yorker profile. It's
the discourse.
The discourse and Aaron Sorkin's response to it. Yeah.
Oh,
is my favorite.
Aaron Sorkin's response.
Through Jessica Chastain, who one of the top like replies on Jessica Chastain's tweet about it, for me anyways. I guess the top replies are always different for whoever it is, but it was another staff writer at the New Yorker, and they were like, sorry, Jessica, I can't take you seriously because you starred in Zero Dark 30, which is CIA propaganda. And I was like, what? I was like, there's a time and a place, and that's not it. She's just out here catching strays. I don't know. It's wild.
Yeah. Oh, man. Good times. Well, Secession Season 3, great show. Best show on TV this year.
Without a doubt.
We look forward to Season 4 and whatever else the show has to offer.
In another 2 years or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Jackson, where can people find you and your video about why Succession is about climate change, kind of? If for whatever godforsaken reason, somebody has watched all of this and is not a person who
That would be
already
rude.
watched that
Honestly,
video.
whoever you are, you're rude. And you can find it at Skip Intro. I'm on Twitter at Skip Intro YT. The YT stands for YouTube. I know I'm clever like that.
And
yeah.
I'm Thomas Flight. You're already on one of my channels. So
Yeah, I hope you know. Yeah, you can read all my Patreon Succession recaps.
Yes.
Maybe I'll do season 4.
There's very fun power rankings for all the episodes where Jackson kept very scientific track of who was in the lead and
Look,
who
if you
was
don't believe in
losing.
my lists, they're scientifically decided, so you don't believe in science, and that's the hill I'm dying on.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll be back at some point with a discussion about Twin Peaks.
You should watch Yellow Jackets. We should talk about Yellow Jackets.
I'll have to check
I'm
that out.
I'm obsessed with the show.
I need a show because Survivor ended, Succession
Okay, this is
ended.
perfect because Survivor just ended, and it's Lost meets American Horror Story. It's wild.
Great. I'll
How do
give
you
it a
feel
go.
about cannibalism?
I don't want it to happen to me.
Interesting. Might be a barrier for entry for this show.
I'll keep that in mind. Shouts out to How To with John Wilson, the most underrated show on television.
Not by me.
Maybe we should
Not
do
by
it.
me.
Maybe
Number
we should
3.
do a discussion about that. We need to champion.
Oh, I would love that, actually.
We need to do a champion. Or
I've been thinking about making a video about him in the show, but I'm worried that nobody will watch it.
I also had the same thought, but I was like, it probably needs to be done anyway because people should be watching it. It's great. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody.
Long outro.
We'll see you later.